Hello and welcome to my React testing library and Jest tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to learn how to test some basic functionalities of the web apps that's built with React. Here is a short summary of what we're going to build. We are going to have a list of data from the server and we're going to test that data is fetched correctly. Another feature will be to create a new post, and that will actually trigger a fetch method to the server and it will add a post to the end of the list. So I will start by creating a project with create react app, and I will copy and paste this command in the documentation. So I will speed it up a little bit, and now our project is ready. So let's drag and drop project into Visual Studio Code. And I will open a terminal and run npm run start. And that will run our app in the browser. Let's remove this existing template and start with implementing our functionalities. I will remove this whole section, and I will also remove a class name because we're not going to use CSS. I will create a new folder components where I'm going to create also folder posts. And inside this folder, I will create posts.js component, which will be in charge for everything that we're going to build. First line of every React component is importing React, and I will declare posts component function that will return div with posts text, and I will export this component as default. I will import posts component into app.js, and now posts text should be visible. So let's switch to posts component, and I would like to put this text in h1 element, so it will be header of this component. And below that I will create an ordered list, and here I would like to iterate through data of posts. And in order to get that data, I will go to JSON placeholder API. That is a fake API that provides us some endpoints that we can use for testing. And I will use this get posts endpoint. I will just copy this link into our component for now. I will use effect react hook in order to fetch this data, and this use effect will have empty array as dependency because I want to call it only once. And I will use fetch method with this endpoint, and then I will provide then callback that will return JSON, and another then callback that will return actual data. And for now, I would like to console log this data just to check that everything works fine. Let's go to the browser and see in our browser's console posts data. So we have an array of 100 posts, and that is great, but now I would like to store that data in some variable, and I will actually use state and create a component state for that. It will be an empty array by default, and I will use setPosts method to update the state. Now I can iterate through these posts because data is stored inside. I will use map function to iterate through posts, and I will have post and index parameters. For each post, I would like to return li element with post title. And don't forget to add key property to each item. So we have a list of posts in the browser, and I would like to adapt a template a little bit. I will wrap this post title with h3 tags, and for the post body I will use paragraph. So now we have both title and body displayed for each post. Now I would like to write a test for this component functionality, and I will create a posts.test.js file inside the components folder. First thing that I'm going to do is to create a describe function that will group all tests that are related to this component. First test that I'm going to write will check if the browser fetch and renders data from the server. So I will call it fetch and render posts. And here is a callback function that will be executed. First, I'm going to render posts component, and I will import render function from testing library. And as a parameter, I will provide posts component. So let's start our tests with npm run test command. We have one failed test, and it is inside app.test.js file. It is something that we should remove because we removed the template that we get from create react app, and it should work fine now. Yeah, both tests pass. So the thing that I want to check in this test is that this post component will fetch data from the server and display it correctly in the DOM. In order to do that, we will need to mock fetch method inside the test. And what does that mean? Before running each test, I would like to create a mock for the fetch method. So when we trigger render method and inside the component we have a fetch method that will actually execute this function that we provide to Jest fn as a callback. So inside this callback, I would like to return just promise resolve for now. Now we have an error which says cannot read property JSON of undefined, and that's because we're just returning the empty promise resolve. We are going to return an object with JSON property, and that JSON should return another function that will return promise resolve, and inside that we are going to put some post data. So I'm going to create a variable where I will put some post data that I would like to use as a response from the server, and I will just copy this part of array, and now I will put this data into promise resolve. So now when we run test and render post component, calling this fetch method will actually return this data as a response from the server. We have an error, and let's see what it is. It says that we should wrap our component into act method. This error occurs when we have updates of component state along with asynchronous code. So we will also need to put async and await in front of the functions. And let's refresh it again. All tests are green now. So let's check that these posts are rendered correctly in the DOM. And in order to check that, I will use screen API from React testing library, and that will provide us a bunch of queries for the DOM. And I will use getByText query, which should check if we have this title in the DOM. So I will wrap it with expect function, and I will run to be in the document function to check if this text exists in the document. So we didn't import screen. I will add it here. And our tests are green again. So this title exists and it's displayed in the document, which is cool. But I would like to check every post item. So I would call for each iteration and check that every post title is displayed in the DOM. So instead of using this hard-coded text, I will use post title. So we have a dynamic test right now. Let's continue with implementing other features for this post component. First, I will create a button, so when user clicks on it, it should open a form for creating a new post. Then I will create a form element, and I will just put a header element inside. So I want this form to be hidden by default, and I will use state React hook for that with state post form is visible. And the default value will be false. So form will be hidden by default. And here is the conditional rendering part. And when user clicks on it, on this button, I will call set post form is visible, and I will set it to true. Okay, we pass a function on click wrongly, so I will check it again. Yeah, callback function should be created this way. And now it works. So when I click on this button, new post header will be visible. I would like to hide this button when the form is visible. And I will also add a cancel button inside the form, so I can actually hide the form again and display add new post button. So when user clicks on this cancel button, I will set post form is visible to false. So now we can toggle between showing and hiding the form. I will continue with adding some input fields. So the first field will be for new post's title, and it will have type text, of course, with a placeholder attribute title. And I will add a break element just to make a new line. And after that, I will add the text area for new post's body with a placeholder body. Another break element, and after that I will add button with type submit. And I will also add a type button to the cancel button because I want to make a difference. Everything looks good. And now I would like to handle form submit event. So when user clicks on submit button, I will actually call the server with post request. And the method name will be handle on submit. And I will create it right above return value. So handle on submit will have event as a parameter. And the first thing that I'm going to do is to prevent default behavior. I'm going to use fetch method with exactly the same endpoint, but in this case I will use a post request. So I will provide additional object with property method, which will be set to post. And in the body, I will actually add a new post data. For now, I will set it to empty object. And in order to create new post data, I will create a new component state. It will be named new post and set new post. Use state will have default value with title of empty string and the body of empty string. So now the value will be equal to new post title property, and in case of text area it will be equal to new post's body. Now when we open the form we have an error, and that means that we will need to add onChange event and reset the state when user change the input field value. I will create a function with event property, and I will set new post to the new value. I will use spread operator of existing new post, and I will provide a new value for title from event target value. Basically, I will keep the body value and add a new title value. And I will do the same for the body text area. I will just change title to body, and I will use the same event targets value which comes from the input field. And now when I type values for input and text area, I should actually be able to use this state. And before I do anything, I will just console log this state to make sure that everything works fine. So now when I click on submit, I have new post value in the browser's console. So now we are ready to send this data to the server, and I will provide it in the body property. But before that, I will use JSON stringify in order to parse that data correctly. So inside JSON stringify, I will just place new post state. Now let's check in the browser if everything works okay. When I type new values and when I click on submit, let's check network request. So we have a request payload, but response is just an ID. And I would need to change actually content type that we're going to send to the server. So inside the headers, I will add content type property, and I will set the value to application/JSON. Now when I click on submit, request payload is here and we have the correct response. It works fine. The response should be the newly created post. And I would like actually to add it at the end of the existing list. So when user clicks on submit, the new post should appear at the end of the list. In order to achieve that, I will use then method, which will parse response as JSON, and another then method that will actually have data of the new post. And now I will call setPosts method, and I will create a new array, and I will use spread operator to use the existing posts, and I will add the data at the end of this array. Now when I click on submit button, I should see the new post at the end of the list. For better user experience, I would also like to hide the form when user submits the form and get successful response from the server. So I will just call setPost form is visible and I will pass a false value as a parameter. And I would also like to reset form input fields to empty string values. I will call setNewPost and I will reuse this default data. But first, I will store it in a variable since I'm going to reuse it on few places. I will name this variable newPost default values. Now when I type a values for new post and when I click submit, the new post will be added at the end of the list. And when I open the form again, input fields will be empty and ready for creating another post. But when I type something and when I click on cancel button, after opening the form again, the values of the input fields remain the same. So I would like to reset the input fields when the user clicks on cancel button. I will just create handle on cancel method, and it will be a function that will call set post form is visible, and it will set it to false. And I will provide handle on cancel for on click event. And it will also set new post to default values. So right now when I click on cancel, the input fields will be empty. Now that we are finished with implementing these functionalities, we will continue with writing some tests. I would like to test that clicking on cancel button will hide the form. First thing that I want to do is to render post component. But before that, I would like to show you another way of handling asynchronous code from within testing environment. And that would be by using wait_for, which is provided by testing library. And you can wrap your code with wait_for and with a wait in front of it, and it will work. So I will render posts component, And the next line would be wait for, because we have some asynchronous update of component state. And inside the callback function, I will use fireEvent from React testing library, which will provide us different methods for simulating various events like clicking, changing, and all the stuff. I will use click method, and as a parameter we need to provide an element on which we would like to trigger click event. That element will be add new post button, because we need to open the form before cancel it. I will use screen API, which is provided by testing library React, so we can query over DOM elements and find the add new post button. I will use get by text query, which will find the element with this text, add new post. Now that we triggered click event on add new post button, we are going to trigger another click event for cancel button. Cancel button should be visible after clicking on add new post button. So I will use the same query get by text, but in this case text will be cancel. Before clicking cancel, I will be able to find input elements, and I will write expect assertion, and I will search for element by placeholder text, and in this case it would be title. So I will select this input field, and I will expect to have this element in the document when we click on add new post. That means that the form will be opened. And in case of clicking on cancel button, I would expect not to have this element in the document. I will just add async in front of the function, and I will replace get by placeholder with query by placeholder text. We should use get by query when we expect to have this element in the DOM, and query by query will be used when we expect not to have the element in the DOM. I will just put not in front of to be in the document. I would also like to test that clicking on cancel will reset the input fields. So I'm going to check the value of the input field when user clicks cancel. But before that, I would like to trigger another event, and that event will be change. So I will write fireEvent change, and I will provide query for input title. And another parameter will be the value that I would like to change the input to. So it will basically simulate typing by the user. And it will change the value of the input field. I would like to open the form again, and I will trigger a click event on add new post button again. After clicking on this button, I would expect to have the value of the input field empty. I would expect to be empty string. Let's see if tests are successful. Yeah, everything is green. And for practicing purpose, we can also check the value of the input field after triggering change event. The next test that I'm going to write is to check if the user is able to create a new post, and we will also check submitting the form. And we can also check rendering a new post. I will create a function, and first thing that I'm going to do is to render the posts component. And I will put async because we will have Ajax call to the server, and therefore I will use wait for. I will fire click event on add new post button, and I will find it by query get by text. So let's check tests. Everything is green. And this part will be responsible for opening the form. And after clicking on this button, I would expect to have the input title with empty value. I will do the same for text area for new post's body. The tests are green, so we will continue. And I would also expect to have submit button visible on the screen. So I will use get by role query, and I will add additional parameter, which is submit name, which is like a text of this element. All tests are green, and the next phase would be to start typing. But before this, I would actually like to create some variables because I'm going to reuse the elements that I selected. I will store this title input in the variable and also body text area so I can reuse it later. And I will now replace it. I would like to trigger change event on title input. I can actually reuse this variable now. I would set target value to new post title. And I will do the same for body input element, but I'm just going to change the value to the new post body. Now I would like to trigger click event on submit button, and I will call fireEvent click, and I will actually create another variable to store this submit button so I can also reuse it. And I will pass submit button element here and here for click event. And now we should actually add a wait and wait for, because after clicking on submit button we are going to trigger fetch method, which is asynchronous method. So now it should work fine. Yep. And now we should check that the form is hidden after submitting the form. I would expect that both input and text area elements do not exist in the DOM. So everything is green. And now I would like to test that the new post that we submitted with the form will be displayed on the screen. So we should actually check, is there any element with the new post title text? And the part where we add a new post to the list is here. So basically we use response data from the server and we add it to the existing list. In order to achieve this in the test, we need to adapt the fetch mock a little bit. We should actually check what is the provided method when we call fetch. So in case it is a fetch with a post request, we should return the newly created post. And if it is a get method, we should actually return the list of posts. We will have two properties, URL and options. And in case that we use fetch method for different URLs, we might want to use a switch case for URLs. But since we use only one URL, it is fine just to check the method. So I will check if this request is the post method. And if it's not, I will just return promise resolve with mock posts data. So I will assume that this is the get method. And for the post method, I would also return promise resolve, but I'm going to create another mock post data, and that will be single post. I will just copy an item from this endpoint. And now in case of post request, I will return this mock. So when user submits the form, it should get this newly created post, and I will actually use that data to trigger typing, actually changing the input value. And now I can actually search for the post that is added to the existing list of posts. I will search for text, and I will use this title from mock new post data, and I would expect to be in the document. And I can also search for body. And since we have a line break in the body text, we should actually search for the part of the body which make it easier. So I will use regex and search for element that contains this part of the text. And let's check tests. So we have some errors, and the error is cannot read property method of undefined. Okay, so when we use fetch method for get a request, we actually don't provide method as a parameter because it has a default value. So I will just add a question mark. That means that the value of the options can be undefined, and everything is green again. For simplicity reasons, I used only one component, posts, but I would like to show you how you can test that some property functions are called from the single component. So I will just create a new component for add new post button. And first thing that I'm going to do is to import React. And I will copy the template of the component, and I will create a component function that should return this button, and it should have a onClick method as a property that should be passed from the parent component. And I will also export this function as a default. And now I will just use it instead of this button. I would also need to provide onClick property. So it should work the same. And I will create a test file for this component, but we had an error. I will check what it is. Okay, so we need to import this component. I will just import add new post button from this file, and it should be fine. Okay, we also need to add some tests to this file, and it should work. I will create describe function, and inside I will create the first test, and I would like to test that onClick is triggered when user actually clicks on the button element. First thing that I'm going to do is to render the add new post button component. And I will pass a property onClick. And before that, I will just create a onClick mock function with Jest fn. And I will pass this mock function as a onClick property. So now I'm going to trigger a click event on this button. So I will import screen, and I will use getByQuery to find the button. And it has add new post text. So now I would expect that this onClick callback function would be called, and I will use to have been called method. And let's check tests. It fails. Okay, we should import render from testing library. That is the issue. So now it works fine. Yeah, everything works fine. So we can also use similar approach to test that fetch method is being called when the component is mounted. So I will write expect window.fetch, and I will call to have been called with, because I want to check that this fetch method is called with the parameter which is the endpoint from JSON placeholder, and here it is. So I would like to test that the fetch method is triggered with this endpoint. And the tests are green.